Hello everyone, this is David from the Smack Studio team, and today I'd like to go over the character editor. And it's important to note this is an alpha, so it's a very early version of this, but we wanted to kind of get you started with a quick tutorial to jump right in and start animating, exporting, etc. So to get started, I'm actually going to open a base character. While it is possible to create a character from scratch, right now we are just going to cover modifying an existing character. There's a few reasons for doing that too. It makes things a lot easier when it comes to keeping track of all the different animations that are required, for example. So with that in mind, we're going to start with a base character. So I will click this open icon on the top right, and then I will select Granite as our base character. So once we load in Granite, here's how this looks. On the left here, we have an ability to kind of pick what animations we're going to be looking at. On the top, we have a timeline with various layers, which I will explain later on. And on the right, we have some important items here too that I will also explain. But before I really go deep into this, I would like to just kind of give you an idea what the character looks like unmodified, so we kind of have a baseline. So to do that, I'm going to click this controller icon and then press A with my GameCube controller. I'm currently using a Mayflash adapter. And then I'll click Test Play. Now that'll open a little demo test environment where you can move around, and you'll notice this is kind of how he moves, and these are his animations. They look like this, and he's rigged in this way. So there's a quick overview of what it should look like by default, and then any modifications we'll make, you'll now have a frame of reference. Alright, so the first thing I want to show you is how to kind of take advantage of the automation that this tool provides, which I would say is its killer feature. It's really cool. So we're going to pick an animation. In this case, I'll pick the idle animation, and when I click play, it'll kind of play through this animation. Now, I'm going to make some modifications, and I will show you just how cool this is. So I'm going to stop the animation. I'm going to select this keyframe to start, and you'll notice it's applying animations to all of these layers. And so at this point, it goes from here to here. So we're going to change this animation. So we're going to have it start here, but I'm just going to kind of click in here on the skeleton on this bone, and I'm going to move his right arm up like this. I'm going to move his forearm. So he's going to be doing something a little different. I'll move his left arm. Then I'll move his legs too, just to give you a rough idea about how this works. All right, so I've completely changed the animation. So what that has done is I'm going to start here again. So it has completely changed the animation. And so what it's done is it's automatically interpolated those frames for me based on these keyframes. So instead of having to meticulously redraw the sprite and change it, it's basically done the work for me, which is really cool. So there's a quick explanation of something you can do like really, really quickly. The other thing I want to point out is what you can do, not just with animating like this, but with changing an appearance. So I'm going to hide this player hitbox for a second to make it more visible. And I'm going to click on this mech rig here under animation rigs. It's just called mech rig. You can call it whatever you'd like. But I want to show you something else really cool. So let's say I wanted to change his face, and I wanted to give him different eyes. So I would look for his head sprite. Here it is. And I'm going to just click the paint option. And I'll make his eyes red, why not? And what you can do is you can zoom in by using the scroll wheel. And I'm going to change these pixels to be like this. I'm going to change it to be red. Maybe I'll just pick a lighter version for this. Okay, so now he has very stark, he has a striking red gaze. All right, so that's a change that I made. And what I'm going to do also is I'm going to remember that there's front and there's back. So back is still the same as it was. So I'm actually going to go back, and I'm going to click this option, copy front image to back, and it will replace it, which is really handy. You'll be using that a lot to just kind of quickly mirror whatever you're doing, because obviously they'll face in different directions in game. All right, so I've just made this change. I'm going to click accept, and what you'll find is it's already been modified. All right, so with maybe 10 seconds of work, I've changed an animation and I've changed a sprite, and countless number of frames have been generated for that. So I'm going to show you again that in test play. So here is you can see the original on the top right, and here is my modification instantly. I mean, And here it is being applied in all these other animations we haven't even touched yet, right? The eyes are still red. So now let's say you wanted to create a new keyframe. To do that, you'd pick a spot that currently does not have a keyframe, and then you'll click this button here. So let's say, but before he did his full change to this, I wanted something else to happen before that. So I would pick a time like this, and let's say I want him to move his head back like this. All right. So now his head's gonna move, and that was done by creating that keyframe right here with this button here. Quick editor's note here. Yes, you can copy and paste keyframes. So let's say you have this keyframe that you want to copy. You just move over to where you want to paste it. You hit Control C on this, and then you hit Control V, and that will copy over those keyframes. You can also copy and paste multiple keyframes at once by selecting them and then hitting paste. So that all works just fine. So now the next thing I want to show you guys is how the sprite component of this works, because what I've done basically is I've generated a bunch of sprites, and I can export those sprites and edit them fully. Let's say, for example, I was relatively happy with how this looks, but I wanted it looking just right. I wanted to really just polish this and perfect this. And for any of you pixel artists out there who work with sprites a lot, you'll know that you really want to get it down just the way that you want it. So to do that, I'm going to click Export, and you'll want to take note of these settings. These are important. So let's say, so I'm going to generate a preview here, and you can kind of see the way that this is done. This is the idle animation that we're currently selecting, and it has currently printed out every one of these. And also something to note is that this is done in 40 frames a second. So, do the math, you can figure out how long this animation is. And if you need to change the cell size, so for example, different, you have different platforms and different programs that kind of handle things differently. So if you're using a Sprite, if you're using Photoshop or Graphic Scale. So anyway, an example of that might be you want to change the cell size to 128. Let's say you want to do that. Now they're a little bit closer together, so I'm going to click Generate Preview. So now there's less space between them, but what you're noticing is there's some clipping happening on the top. So that's where the offset comes in handy. So I'll change the Y offset to, let's say, -50, and then I'll click Generate Preview again. Okay, now we're looking a lot better. I'm not seeing clipping here. So that's good. So let's say I'm happy with that. I'm going to click Export. All right, I'm going to pick a directory. You can pick your desktop or wherever you'd like. I'm going to pick, let's see, I'll pick this folder, and I'll call this Granite Idle, but I'll spell it right. All right, so there's that. I'm going to save that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how to edit this in a photo editor or a pixel art editor, whatever you use. I use Photoshop, so I'm going to show that. I'm going to open the sprite sheet that we just exported, and here you can see a grid view of all of the animations that you made with the automation tool, the character editor. Obviously, this is it in a sprite grid format, but you might, use it by layers if that's what you prefer. But anyhow, I just want to show you an example of ways you might touch it up. So let's say, for example, you're happy with the eyes on some of the earlier animations, but like later down the line, maybe you're not a fan of how the eyes look. Maybe you want to copy them from another layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and I'm going to say, all right, this eye looks pretty good. So I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to use it again on the one where I don't feel it's as strong. So maybe I'll replace this one, for example. And this is where you can do some touch-up work. So maybe I'll, do this. Maybe I'm not super happy with the outline, so maybe I'll touch up the outline a little bit so it's more consistent. And like these are just some examples of things that you can do to kind of tweak it and perfect it, right? But just, the bulk of the work has already been done, and you can go in and make the little tweaks as much as you'd like. So that's an example of, things you can do to touch it up. So I'm going to save this. I'm just going to save over it, I suppose. All right, so going back to our tool here, I'm going to show you how to import the sprites that we just modified. So I'm going to click Import from down here, and then I'm going to click Load Sprite Sheet, and then select the sprites that we exported. Now at this point, it's important to remember how we exported these. So for example, it'll actually know that it should automatically detect what the cell size is. However, it's not going to necessarily remember the offset here. So if you recall, we actually exported at -50. So if we don't input that value and just click import, and let's say we hide this animation rig layer, you can see that our friend Granite is in the floor. So this is not what you want, obviously. So I'm going to go ahead, click the sprite layer, and click the trash can to delete it. I'm going to make the animation rig visible again, and I'm going to actually re-import this sheet here, and I'm going to make sure and set the offset to the same as whatever I exported initially. So now when I click import, now it'll line up just fine. So we're good there now, which is great. So what I want you to notice is that we have two layers now that we've recently been using. We've had the animation rig, which has been the one that we've used to animate, and then we have the sprite layer, which is essentially what we've imported that was based on what we exported from the animation rig. So right now there's two layers. The sprite layers will always render in game, and then if you so choose, the animation rig will also render, although most people probably wouldn't want that. So if you don't want the animation rig to load in game, simply unselect this checkbox here, and it actually won't get rendered in game. This is just for the viewport visibility, and this is actually being visible in game. So I can't remember exactly which. Okay, here it is. All right, so if you recall on this layer, this is the one that we modified. So if I hide the sprites layer, you can see the old eye from the animation rig that happened automatically, and then this is my tweaked version with the added outline up here and the eye. So this is an example of taking the automation and utilizing it to do most of the work for us, and then making little tweaks like that, all right? So you can do some pretty wild stuff by leaving both sprites and animation rig on. So I want to demonstrate that really quickly because it's really cool. So I'm going to actually mess with the sprite a little bit. I'm going to click on sprites here and click this particular frame, and I'm going to say that it's an effect layer. And here you can do a bunch of cool special properties that are related to effects here. So you can make it glow, you can kind of change the scale independently from everything else, and then you can change the offset. So I can put it to the left, to the right, put it in the background, or the foreground. I can go up, down, right? So I think what I'll do is make him very large and glowy. So now you get this kind of strange result where when he's an idle, there will be a duplicate of him that is glowing. So this is exclusive for sprites, by the way, for sprite layers. But just for fun, we're gonna see what that looks like in game. All right, so now we have a standard Granite with red eyes, except when he's idle, and he makes a strange. He moves his arms and his head and his legs in a strange way that we animated, and he has a giant glowing version of himself. So that's pretty awesome. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to undo that. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to hit delete, and I'm going to re-import that just to have a clean slate. And this viewport might not update immediately, so what you want to do is click a frame, and it'll reset to what it should be displaying. So I'm going to import the sheet again here. I'm going to select this. I'm going to make sure to select -50 and hit enter so that it's an entered value. Click import, and now we have it restored like we did before. The other important difference to point out is that with a sprite layer, you can actually edit it like on the fly. So with an animation rig, it's handled a bit differently where it's simply for animations. But now that we have this sprite layer, I can go in, click paint, and I can make on the fly edits in the tool too. So I can add, I can add this, and I can go frame by frame and make little tweaks if I like. And, I can do this. I can do whatever changes I want, just like I would in a photo editor, which is really awesome. I can erase stuff. I can fill stuff. There's a lot of really cool tools. I can move things. So, like, for example, let's say I wanted to move the entire character up a little bit during this. I would just click and drag it up a little bit. And so, obviously, now let's hide the background layer. So now we have him go up a little bit. Like his little jump. And that was all done with the tools here, right? Really cool stuff. All right, next we're going to look at the rig here. And on the left, we'll have a navigator, which I'll kind of go through. But we also have this area where you can kind of isolate particular sprites to work with. And if you hold shift, you can actually, work with multiple at once. So maybe I'll do right forearm and arm. And then when I do that and I click and drag, it'll actually move the entire set that I have by holding shift. So this will help you select individual parts, and this is just for visual reference. This doesn't have much to do with how they're appended to the bones or how they're connected or anything like that. This is just a quick visual reference. All right, so next I want to look at the skeleton. And it's the bones are like super flexible, so you can click and you can add new ones. You can move them by dragging and dropping. And so just to quickly demonstrate, I'm going to show you how to add some bones. So I've pressed 4 to select add bone, and I'm going to click here and then define the endpoint here. And here's bone 1. I'm going to drag it just under the head, and that's going to make a child bone of the head bone. And I can do that again by selecting head, and I can click and drag. Let's say I want to do it here. Now he has 2 kind of freakish ears, and I don't think I'll be using them for much, but that's an example of how to add bones. So in general, you probably won't want to move the bones very much from their current positions, but and the reason for that is the sprite placement is in relation to the bone placement. It's a kind of a relative relationship. So if you move a sprite or you move a bone, it might mess with all the animations that you've set up already. So, well, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to replace an arm sprite. So let's say I wanted to replace Granite's right arm. Maybe I'll select the right arm sprite here, and you can see there's a front and a back. So here it is from this side, here it is from this side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to load a new sprite sheet to replace it. And I have one set up, which is Cora and her parts. And so what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to go to clear layer, and that's going to completely remove this arm. I'm going to click new, or not new, sorry. I'm going to click this and locate the one I want to replace it with. In this case, it looks like the right arm would be right here. So I'm going to left click and drag over what I'm trying to do. And I can either right click to immediately import, or I can click this to import it. And now I can click and drag and put this wherever I like. Now, obviously, this is not a super good match for this particular size, but for the purposes of this, we'll kind of run with it, all right? So I'm going to do that. And then before I, accept my changes here and bind this or what have you. Oh, it's already bound. I don't have to do that. I'm going to click back, and I'm going to clear this layer, and then I'm going to click this really handy option, which is copy front image to back, which is going to automatically put that there if I wanted to. Or I could clear the layer and manually select this, which is the manually drawn other side of that. But as a quick option, you can have this option too, which is nice. All right, so I'm going to put that roughly in the spot where it should be. So now we have a front and we have a back for that. All right, so now when you go to edit bones, it's going to look a little weird because you can see the placement of this bone doesn't really perfectly align with this new sprite that we're using. So it's going to be a little weird, and in that case, you might need to rebind a bone if there's a change to it. So for example, if you change like the size of the sprite, or maybe there's a completely new image that you're using, like what we've just done, that's when you would want to probably, rebind. Or if you, let's say you change the skeleton, right? You'd want to rebind that in that case also. And this check mark means that it's bound. So if you click unbind, that'll unbind it and you can rebind it that way. All right, so now we have a kind of 3D view of this new forearm that we included. This is, of course, all automatically generated. So now let's test this strange, yeah, so you can already tell it's a little off, and that has to do with the fact that we didn't make any modifications to the skeleton, didn't change the sprite to really fit the character at all. But nonetheless, you can still see kind of how it works. So we have Granite just like, actually, you know what? That doesn't look too bad, which is pretty funny. That animation looks a little weird, but actually, without any modifications to the skeleton or the size, it actually works okay, which is hilarious. So you can see how quickly you can do something like that, which is awesome. Yeah, so the next thing I want to look at is changing the hitboxes of the attacks and the fighter itself. So let's go to attacks, and let's just pick a standard attack. And first, let's talk about player hitboxes. You can see that here. And throughout the duration of this animation, the player hitbox does not change. But if you wanted to do that down the road, you can obviously add a keyframe and modify it, right? So I'm going to pick this one. I'm going to click this, and it's going to allow me to change the height and the width. So if you wanted an incredibly vulnerable character, this is how it might look. And yeah, that would not be great. So that's how you modify that, which is pretty cool. And for attack hitboxes, I'm going to actually hide the player hitbox for a second. It works very much the same way. You can click it and then make adjustments. So let's say you wanted this move to be just incredibly overpowered, right? This will specify the duration for how long that'll be active. And then this keyframe will end it, right? So, but if you have a frame-by-frame change in where the hitbox goes, that's where you can kind of add a keyframe to change where it is. So like, let's say, you know, we wanted to change where this hitbox went. We can just kind of click this and we can click this and we can kind of move it and make, you know, whatever changes we'd like. So now it moves differently, right? So yeah, you can mess around with this, and that's kind of how those hitboxes work. And obviously, every time you make a change, like let's this is gonna be so goofy. Let's make this like, let's make this part of the first hit like enormous. Okay, so now I'm gonna test this, and you're gonna see this happen. So watch this. I'm gonna be over here. I'm hitting him from way over there in the first hit. So there you go. There's a example of that working. And the CPU can't do anything, but if they could, they could attack me instantly because my player hitbox is enormous. So, okay, there you have a little overview of that. There are two more things I want to show you. The other one is character stats. So this is kind of general character attributes in general. You can modify the maximum walking speed, and obviously you want to make this balanced, but for the purposes of, you know, showcasing it, I'm going to make it absurd. Let's like double this ish, and then let's change this to faster. Yeah, just as an example. So I've just changed these stats. Let's see. Oh yeah, I'm flying. So anyway, those are general character stats. The last thing I want to go over are the projectiles. So, there's another thing to mention is, like, if you want to add like a new layer, right? You want to add more layers. There are limits on all of them except for sprites. But you can add more sprites. If you want to add another element, you could do that. And then the more sprite sheets that you load, you can pull from different ones. You can do as many of those as you want. But for now, let's talk about projectiles. All right, so to modify the projectiles, I'm going to make sure to select side B, which is the move that incorporates the projectile already. So you can see here there's an action that says play this sound and then create this projectile. So to modify that, I'm going to make sure this menu is expanded, and I'm going to click right here, and that's going to open the projectile. So here you can see that we can determine the attack hitbox of this projectile. If we wanted to, we could completely replace it with something else. Let's say, for example, I want it to be Korra's head. All right, I'm going to like select this layer, and I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to drag it around the dot because that's going to be like the anchor point. I'm going to click return to character, and we're going to test it, and I'm going to see what Granite's projectiles look like. Well, you get to see it there. Okay, there we go. So it's a Korra head now instead of a rock. So that's pretty funny. So that's an example of like how you can mess with projectiles. The final steps of the character editor are now you want to finalize your character. So this will like bake in the animations. It'll kind of make it a fully fledged character, and it will add it to a new section of your game, which will be a custom character section. So, but before I do that, probably now's a good time to mention that it's definitely a best practice to save often. So, in fact, I should have probably done it much earlier in this tutorial. But anyway, I'm going to call this Granite Red Eyes. Now we're going to actually create our portrait. So I'm going to click Select File. I'm going to select the portrait that I've made. Make sure that it's 64 by 64 pixels. I'm going to click Open, and I'm going to click Finalize now. Now this will probably take 20 to 30 seconds, depending. And so just give it some patience. And when you're done, you can click X here. All right, so with that done, I'll click X here, and I will go to VS mode, and as you can see, we have a custom character named Granite Red Eyes. And he is fully selectable and playable just like in that test mode, and available to play in versus. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that brief tutorial, and hopefully it gets you started on making some really awesome creations. Thanks everyone. Until next time.